The first time I realized my fiancé had chosen someone else over me, I was standing outside a conference room with a folder full of numbers that could have saved his family's company. Through the glass wall, I could see Daniel smiling. Not the tired smile he used with me after 18-hour workdays. Not the nervous smile he gave when he asked whether his father would approve of our wedding plans. This was his confident smile, the one he wore when he believed he had already won. His father, Richard Vale, sat at the head of the table. Beside him was Daniel's younger sister, Chloe, and across from them sat a man I had never met. Then I heard Richard say, "Once the merger is signed, there is no reason to keep her involved." I stopped breathing. Daniel didn't argue. He simply lowered his eyes and said, "She'll be hurt, but she'll understand." My fingers tightened around the folder. For 3 years, I had worked beside him. I had helped turn a failing logistics company into a profitable regional business. I had built the inventory system that cut their losses by nearly 40%. I had negotiated with suppliers when nobody else could get them to answer calls. And when Daniel's father called me a clever assistant, I swallowed my pride. Because Daniel always told me, "We're building this together." I believed him. That was my mistake. I pushed open the door. Everyone turned. Daniel's face went pale. "Mia," I placed a folder on the table. "You should read this before you sign anything." Richard frowned. "This is a private meeting." "I know." Daniel stood. "Mia, let's talk outside." "No." The word surprised even me. I looked at him. "For once, I'm going to let you explain yourself in front of everyone." Silence settled over the room. Daniel glanced at his father. That small movement hurt more than anything he could have said. Richard leaned back. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." I almost laughed. A misunderstanding. That was what people call betrayal when they wanted the betrayed person to feel unreasonable. I opened the folder. The company is being valued based on the new distribution model. Richard's expression changed. Daniel stared at me. "You designed it," I continued. "But your merger documents list it as company property." "It is company property," Richard said. "No." I looked directly at Daniel. "It's my intellectual property." Daniel swallowed. He knew. Of course he knew. For months, I had told him I wanted to build my own logistics platform someday. Something smaller, smarter, and designed for independent retailers instead of giant corporations. He had listened while I explained every idea. He had kissed my forehead and told me, "When we're married, you'll have all the freedom you want." Apparently, he had meant freedom after I had finished making him rich. Chloe crossed her arms. "You were never a founder, Mia." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was true, because Daniel didn't correct her. I looked at the man I had planned to marry. "Is that what you think?" He said nothing. I nodded slowly. "Okay." Daniel stepped toward me. "Mia, wait." But I was already closing the folder. For years, I had thought love meant staying long enough for someone to finally understand your value. That afternoon taught me something different. Sometimes leaving is the only way to stop teaching people how badly they can treat you. I walked out without another word. Behind me, Daniel called my name twice. I didn't turn around. That night, Daniel came to my apartment. He stood outside my door for almost 10 minutes before I opened it. His tie was loose. His hair was messy. He looked exhausted. For one dangerous second, my heart remembered the man I loved. The boy who had met me 7 years earlier in university computer lab. I had been struggling with a broken laptop. He had leaned over my shoulder and said, "You're fighting it instead of restarting it." I had glared at him. "You always this annoying?" "Only when someone looks like they're about to throw a computer out the window." I had laughed. That was how it started. Years later, when he proposed on the rooftop of the first warehouse we helped rescue, I cried so hard I couldn't answer him. He had promised me, "Whatever happens, we're on the same side." Now he stood outside my apartment and said, "You misunderstood what happened." I almost smiled. "Then explain it." He looked down. "My father wants a merger. And you?" "I need time." "No, you need an answer." He rubbed his face. "Mia, if I fight him now, the company could collapse." I stared at him. "So you chose the company." "It's not that simple." "It is." He stepped closer. "I love you." Those words used to make everything inside me soften. That night, they sounded like an apology for something he wasn't sorry enough to change. I asked, if I hadn't walked into that room, Would you have told me? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I closed the door. For the next week, I disappeared from the company. Not dramatically. I didn't send angry messages. I didn't expose their documents. I didn't call their investors. I simply stopped showing up. Everyone expected me to return. Daniel sent flowers, then messages, then apologies. Richard sent a lawyer. The lawyer informed me that anything created during my employment belonged to Vale Meridian Logistics. I read the letter twice. Then I looked at the old notebook sitting beside my desk. It contained the original architecture of the system I had built. Every handwritten diagram, every calculation, every failed idea, every improvement. And beneath the final page was a sentence I had written 2 years earlier. One day, I'll build this for myself. I had forgotten that sentence. Until that night, I opened my laptop. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about saving Daniel's family. I wasn't thinking about the wedding. I wasn't thinking about proving Richard wrong. I was thinking about one question. What if I stopped building their future and started building mine? 3 days later, I registered a small company. I named it North Star Systems. My savings were barely enough to cover 6 months of rent and operating expenses. I had no office, no employees, no investors, and no guarantee that anyone would buy what I was building. But when I stared at the blank screen that first morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Fear, then excitement, then, strangely, peace. Across the city, Daniel was still telling everyone I needed time to calm down. His father was finalizing the merger. Their perfect plan was moving forward. They believed I had finally given up. They had no idea I had just started. For the first 2 months, North Star Systems existed in a room above a closed bakery. The room smelled faintly of flour, old coffee, and rain. My desk was secondhand. My office chair had one wheel that refused to cooperate, and my bank account became more frightening every morning. Still, I worked. I rebuilt the platform from the ground up. The system I had created for Vale Meridian had been designed around large warehouses. North Star would be different. I wanted small businesses to use it without hiring a team of analysts. A neighborhood furniture shop should be able to know what was selling. A pharmacy distributor should know exactly where inventory was stuck. A family-owned grocery chain should be able to predict demand before shelves went empty. The idea was simple. Making it work was not. My first prototype crashed 11 times in 1 week. On the 12th crash, I put my forehead against the desk. "You're not allowed to die," I whispered to the computer. A voice behind me said, "I think it heard you." I turned. A woman stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. Her name was Lena. She owned the bakery downstairs. "You're still here?" she asked. "I live here now." She laughed. "Then at least take the good coffee." That became our routine. Every morning, she brought coffee. Every night, I sent her home with whatever excuse I could invent for not eating dinner. She was the first person who saw North Star before it was impressive. She didn't care about my previous job. She didn't know Richard Vale. She had never heard of Daniel. To her, I was simply the woman upstairs who was trying very hard not to fail. One evening, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" I hesitated, because I was tired of building things for people who didn't believe I belonged in the room. She looked at me for a moment. "Then build something that makes it impossible to remove you from the room." I smiled. That's the plan. Meanwhile, Daniel's life looked perfect from the outside. The merger announcement appeared in business newspapers. Vale Meridian was being absorbed into a much larger supply chain corporation. Richard was celebrating. Chloe posted photographs from the signing dinner. Daniel appeared beside his father in every picture. He looked successful. He looked happy. I told myself I didn't care. Then one night, I saw a photograph of him wearing the watch I had given him on our 3rd anniversary. I closed the page. Some wounds don't disappear because you stop touching them. They simply become quieter. 3 months after North Star launched, our first real customer signed. A chain of independent hardware stores. The contract was small, but it changed everything. They reported a 12% reduction in excess inventory within 6 weeks. Then another company called. Then another. I hired my first employee. Then my second. Our little room above the bakery became too small. For the first time, I began to understand that this wasn't just an escape. It was becoming a company. Then the past came looking for me. It arrived in the form of an email from Daniel. The subject contained only 4 words. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened it. His first sentence made my stomach tighten. "Something is wrong with the merger." I didn't answer Daniel. Instead, I called our attorney. "Can you check something for me?" "What?" "Who owns the original optimization architecture I developed while working at Vale Meridian?" There was a pause. "We've discussed this." "I know. I want the complete file." An hour later, I had the answer. The legal situation was more complicated than I had realized. The basic system I had built while employed by Vale Meridian belonged partly to the company. But the predictive model I had designed independently during evenings and weekends had never been transferred through an assignment agreement. And Northstar's new platform wasn't a copy. It was built from my original predictive architecture. That distinction mattered a lot. I pulled the old notebook from my drawer. Every date was written beside each development, every experiment, every failed formula, every conversation where I had discussed creating an independent system. For the first time, I realized something I hadn't understood when I was heartbroken. I hadn't walked away empty-handed. I had walked away with knowledge. And knowledge, when combined with years of work, could become something nobody could simply take from you. A week later, Daniel appeared outside my new office. He looked different. Not older exactly, just less certain. He stood when I approached. "Mia, Daniel, I've been trying to reach you." I noticed. He smiled weakly. "Can we have coffee?" "No." His expression fell. "5 minutes. I don't think there's anything left to discuss." "There is." I waited. He lowered his voice. "The merger is failing." I said nothing. The parent company discovered that Vale Meridian's new system can't handle the smaller clients they acquired. So they need your architecture." I almost laughed. "You mean they need Northstar?" He looked uncomfortable. "I mean they need the technology, which belongs to my company." "Mia, this could be a huge opportunity." "For whom?" He didn't answer. That was when I understood. He wasn't there because he missed me. He was there because the thing he had helped push me away from had become valuable. I told him, "I'm not selling." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand how much money we're talking about." "I understand perfectly. We could rebuild everything." "We already did." He stared at me. Then he said something that took me completely by surprise. "My father thinks you deliberately sabotaged us." I blinked. "I didn't even know your system was failing." "He doesn't believe that." "I don't care what he believes." Daniel looked down. "Mia, I should have defended you." The words were quiet, almost sincere. For a moment, I remember the rooftop, his hands around mine, the promise. Then I remember the conference room. He had known. He had heard his father say I wasn't necessary, and he had stayed silent. I stepped back. "You should have." He nodded. "I know." "Do you?" He looked at me. "I do now." I wanted to tell him that now was too late. Instead, I simply said goodbye, Daniel. He walked away. I watched him disappear through the glass doors. Then my phone rang. It was our largest potential client. Their chairman said, "Mia, we'd like to discuss an exclusive partnership." I sat down. "How exclusive?" He answered carefully. "Exclusive enough to change the entire market." I looked through the window at the city. For years, I had wanted Daniel to choose me. Now someone was asking me to choose how big my future could become. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to choose myself. The partnership changed Northstar overnight. Not into a giant corporation. Not yet. But into a company people could no longer ignore. The chairman of Halcyon Retail Group, Marcus Reed, gave us access to more than 300 independent stores. Our software connected their warehouses, suppliers, and storefronts into one system. For the first time, I had enough data to test the idea I had carried in my head for years. The results were better than I expected. Our system didn't just track inventory. It predicted where shortages would happen before they happened. That was the difference. Within 6 months, Northstar had moved into a real office. I hired engineers. I hired customer support. I hired people who were smarter than me in areas where I was weak. That was another lesson I had learned. Being capable didn't mean doing everything yourself. One afternoon, Lena walked into my office carrying a cake. "You survived," she announced. I looked at the cake. "What is this?" "Your company survived its first year." I smiled. You remembered. Of course I remembered. She put the cake on my desk. Then she looked around. You know what I like most? What? You don't look like you're running away anymore. The words hit me harder than she knew. Because she was right. When I started North Star, every decision had been made with one thought buried underneath it. I will prove them wrong. Now that thought was disappearing. I wanted to build something useful. Something honest. Something that could outlive my anger. That was when the first serious attack came. A competitor began telling clients that North Star had stolen technology from Vail Meridian. At first, I ignored it. Then 2 customers asked for clarification. Then 1 threatened to terminate their contract. My attorney called me late one evening. This isn't random. What do you mean? The accusations are based on documents that should only exist inside Vail Meridian's merger files. I went quiet. Someone was leaking confidential information, and there was only one company with access to those documents. Vail Meridian. I spent the night reviewing every claim. By morning, I found something. They had taken screenshots from an early prototype I had built years ago. But there was one problem. The prototype contained a feature that North Star had never used. And the leaked screenshot was time-stamped after I had already left Vail Meridian. Someone had altered the evidence. I called my lawyer. We fight this. She answered immediately. No. I frowned. No. We document everything first. She continued, if they're trying to force you into an emotional response, don't give them one. So I didn't. We gathered records, development logs, source control history, email timestamps, customer contracts, every piece of evidence showing what I had built when I built it and how North Star's platform had evolved independently. Then we waited. 3 days later, Vail Meridian's parent company announced that it was reconsidering the merger. Richard Vail called me. I didn't answer. He called again. Then Daniel. Then Chloe. I still didn't answer. For years, I had been the person trying to get them to listen. Now they were discovering what silence felt like. But I didn't know yet that their desperation had already reached a dangerous point. The next morning, Daniel came to North Star with a folder. He didn't ask for a meeting. He simply waited in reception until I agreed to see him. When he entered my office, he looked exhausted. You need to hear this. I gestured toward the chair. Sit. He placed a folder on my desk. My father wasn't the one who leaked the documents. I raised an eyebrow. Then who was? Chloe. I stared at him. He swallowed. She believed the merger was going to make her head of the new regional division. But when the parent company started reviewing the technology, they realized your work was the most valuable asset. So she tried to discredit me. She thought if they believed North Star was built from company property, they'd shut you down. I opened the folder. Inside were emails. Chloe had been communicating with a consultant hired by the acquiring company. She had sent him old development files. She had written that I was emotionally unstable and likely to abandon the company again. I read the words without feeling much. Daniel watched me. I found out yesterday. And I confronted her. What did she say? He looked away. She said you deserved it. I closed the folder. That's unfortunate. Daniel stared at me. That's all. What do you want me to say? I thought you'd be angry. I was angry for a long time. I looked at him. I'm just not anymore. He seemed almost disappointed. Then he said, Mia, I know I ruined everything. I didn't answer. I thought protecting my family meant protecting the company. You protected your position. His eyes filled with regret. You're right. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the desk. My old apartment key. I had given it to him years earlier. I kept it, he said. I looked at it. I thought you'd come back. I know. Everyone thought you would. I know. He smiled sadly. You're really not coming back, are you? I shook my head. No. He nodded. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, do you love someone else? The question surprised me. No. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Then I added, but that doesn't change anything. He understood. Love had never been the only problem. Trust was. Respect was. The person I had been when I loved him had spent years making excuses for him. That person was gone. Not because I hated Daniel. Because I had finally learned to stand beside myself. 2 weeks later, the legal investigation cleared North Star. The accusation against us collapsed. The parent company withdrew its claim, and the merger was suspended. Vail Meridian was suddenly in trouble. Suppliers demanded payment. Employees started leaving. The company had depended on a system I had built, and when I walked away, nobody had known how much of its stability had depended on me. But I didn't celebrate. Instead, I offered something unexpected. North Star would license the technology to Veil Meridian at a fair market rate. My attorney stared at me. You want to help them? No. Then why? Because their employees don't deserve to lose their jobs because their executives made terrible decisions. That answer spread through the industry. People called it generosity. It wasn't. It was simply a boundary. I would no longer sacrifice myself for them. But I wouldn't become cruel just because they had been cruel to me. Then Marcus Reed called. Mia, I want you to consider something. What? North Star is ready for its next stage. He paused. I want to invest. I looked around my office. The company had started above a bakery with one broken chair. Now investors were asking to become part of it. I smiled. Send me the proposal. Outside my window, the city lights stretched into the distance. Somewhere across that city, Daniel was watching his family's perfect plan fall apart. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for putting it back together. Marcus's investment offer was larger than anything I had imagined, but I didn't accept it immediately. I had learned the hard way that money could solve problems while creating others. So I spent 3 weeks reviewing every condition. Marcus never pressured me. One afternoon, he sat across from me and said, "You're suspicious of investors." I'm suspicious of anyone who says they want to help without explaining what they want. He laughed. Fair. Then he pushed the contract toward me. No controlling interest. No forced acquisition. You keep operational control. I looked at him. Why? Because I didn't invest in your company because I think you're lucky. He paused. I invested because you're difficult to replace. That sentence meant more to me than he knew. For years, I've been told I was replaceable. An assistant. A girlfriend. Someone who would eventually come back. Now a serious businessman was telling me the opposite. North Star expanded. We opened offices in 2 more cities. Our platform began serving small manufacturers, regional pharmacies, restaurants, and independent retailers. But success brought pressure. Every decision affected hundreds of people. I stopped sleeping 8 hours. I started carrying 2 phones. My team complained that I answered emails at 3 in the morning. Lena finally confiscated my laptop one evening. Enough. I reached for it. Give it back. No. Lena, you built a company because you wanted freedom. I have freedom. She stared at me. You're working 14 hours a day. I sighed. That's different. No, that's just a nicer prison. I laughed to spite myself. She was right. I had spent so long trying to escape one life that I was in danger of building another life. I couldn't leave. So I changed. I delegated. I took weekends off. I started running again. I traveled. I learned to enjoy quiet mornings without feeling guilty. And somewhere along the way, Lena became more than the woman who brought me coffee. We started having dinner together, then long walks, then conversations that lasted until midnight. She never asked me to forget Daniel. She never competed with my past. She simply made room for my present. One evening, we sat beside the river. Lena asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought about it. Sometimes. She nodded. But would you change them? I looked at the water. No. Why? Because I wouldn't be here. She smiled. That's a good answer. I looked at her. You're a good question. She laughed. And for the first time since my breakup, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't built around what I had lost. Meanwhile, Veil Meridian was collapsing. Richard sold his house. Chloe resigned after the internal investigation. Daniel stayed. He took responsibility for keeping the remaining employees paid. When I heard, I felt something unexpected. Respect. Not for the man who had betrayed me, for the man he was slowly becoming. But becoming better didn't mean becoming mine again. Then one morning, my assistant entered my office. There are 3 people waiting in reception. Who? She hesitated. Richard Vale. My stomach tightened. And Daniel. I looked at her. Who is the third? She lowered her voice. Chloe. I closed my eyes. The past had finally arrived at my front door. But this time, I wasn't the frightened woman standing outside their conference room. I was the person whose decision could determine whether their company survived. and I knew exactly why they had come. Richard entered first. He looked older, much older. The confidence that had once filled every room was gone. Daniel followed. Chloe came last. Nobody spoke until they sat down. Richard placed a document on my desk. We're asking for a long-term technology agreement. I glanced at it. Your parent company? They've withdrawn completely. So you're independent again. Technically. I looked at Daniel. How much debt? He answered. Enough. I almost smiled. At least he was honest now. Richard leaned forward. I know what I did to you. I said nothing. I underestimated you. No, I replied. You misunderstood me. He looked confused. I wasn't trying to prove I was better than you. I continued. I just wanted to be treated fairly. His eyes lowered. Chloe suddenly spoke. You destroyed everything. I turned toward her. No. Her voice trembled. You knew the merger was our future. I didn't destroy your future. You built Northstar knowing it would compete with us. I built Northstar because you told me I didn't belong. She looked away. Daniel finally said, Chloe. She snapped, what? Stop. The room became quiet. Richard rubbed his hands together. Mia, I'm asking you as a businessman. I nodded. Then I'll answer as one. I opened their proposal. I'll license Northstar's software. Richard looked relieved. But the terms will be the same as any other client. His relief disappeared. You can't give us preferential pricing? No. Daniel looked at me. You'll charge us full market rates. Yes. Richard stared. You let your former family struggle? I closed the file. I won't punish you. I met his eyes. But I won't rescue you. That was the line. The one I had needed to draw years earlier. Richard sat back. For a moment, he looked almost defeated. Then Daniel said quietly, That's fair. I looked at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bargaining. He simply accepted it. After they left, I stood by the window. Lena entered a few minutes later. How did it go? They want our software. She smiled. And I'll give them what they need. She raised an eyebrow. At a discount. No. She smiled wider. Good. I laughed. That evening, Daniel sent me one final message. Thank you for not destroying us. I stared at it, then replied, Take care of your employees. He answered almost immediately. I will. That was the last conversation we had for nearly a year. During that year, Northstar grew beyond anything I had imagined. We became profitable, then highly profitable, then one of the fastest growing logistics technology companies in the region. A business magazine asked me to appear on its cover. I almost refused. The editor asked why. I answered honestly, because I don't want my story to become about the people who hurt me. She paused. Then what should it be about? I thought about the bakery, the broken chair, the first customer, the first failed prototype, the first employee, the first time I realized I could build something without anyone's permission. I said, make it about starting over without becoming bitter. The article came out 2 weeks later. The photograph showed me standing in Northstar's office. No dramatic expression, no expensive clothes, just me. Behind me was the entire team. People who had joined because they believed in the company. Not because they knew Daniel. Not because they knew Richard. Not because they wanted something from me. They were there because we were building something together. I thought I had finally closed that chapter. Then I received a letter. Not from Daniel. Not from Richard. From the bank handling Vale Meridian's restructuring. The letter contained one sentence that changed everything. Northstar has been identified as the company's largest potential strategic buyer. I read it twice. Then I realized what was coming. The company that had once told me I was replaceable might soon belong to me. I rejected the idea of buying Vale Meridian the next morning. My board didn't understand. You'd acquire the warehouses, contracts, and distribution network at a fraction of what they're worth. I know. Our software already runs part of their operations. I know. Then why not? I looked around the conference table. Because I don't want to own my past. Nobody spoke. Marcus leaned back. That's an emotional answer. It is. He smiled. At least you're honest. But 2 days later, I changed my mind. Not because I wanted Vale Meridian. Because I discovered what would happen if someone else bought it. A private investment group was preparing to strip the company down. They would sell the warehouses, terminate most of the employees, break apart the regional network. Hundreds of people who had nothing to do with my betrayal would lose everything. I remember my first week at Vale Meridian. The warehouse workers had taught me how the company actually functioned. One of them, Samir, had once stayed until midnight helping me understand why shipments were constantly being delayed. He had told me, computers tell you what is wrong. People tell you why. I never forgot that. So I called Marcus. I'll make an offer. He raised an eyebrow. I thought you didn't want to own your past. I don't. Then what changed? I'm not buying the past. I looked at the acquisition papers. I'm buying the people who deserve a future. The deal took 4 months. During that time, Daniel and I crossed paths several times. Our conversations were professional. Nothing more. He had become the interim operations director. He had kept the company alive through its worst months. When the acquisition was announced, the business press exploded. The headline on one article read, "The woman they rejected is now buying the company that rejected her." I hated the headline. Daniel called me. I saw it. So did I. Does it bother you? Yes. Me too. I laughed. At least we agree on something. There was silence. Then he said, "Mia, there's something I need to tell you." I waited. I was offered another job. That's good. I turned it down. Why? I don't know. I thought he was going to say something emotional. Instead, he said, "Because if you're taking over, someone needs to help you understand the company." I smiled. "You don't owe me that." I know. Then why? His answer was quiet. "Because I should have helped you when you needed me." I didn't respond. He continued, "This isn't me asking for another chance. I know. I'm just trying to become someone who doesn't make the same mistake twice." For the first time, I believed him. Not because he sounded convincing, because he wasn't asking me for anything. The acquisition closed on a rainy Thursday. I walked into the headquarters where I had once been told I wasn't important. Employees gathered in the lobby. Some looked nervous. Some looked confused. I stood before them. I'm not here to erase what came before. I paused. I'm here to build what comes next. No grand speech. No revenge. Just that. The applause started slowly, then grew. Afterward, I walked through the old warehouse. The place smelled exactly as I remembered. Oil, cardboard, dust. For a moment, I was 27 again, staying late beside Daniel while we tried to fix a shipment problem. I could almost hear him laughing. Then the memory faded, and I realized something. The place hadn't changed nearly as much as I had. Lena found me, standing alone. "You okay?" "Yes." "You're crying." I touched my cheek. "I guess I am." She took my hand. "You don't have to be ashamed of that." I thought I would feel victorious. And I looked across the warehouse. "I just feel finished." She squeezed my fingers. "That's better." That night, I went home with her. Not because I needed someone to save me, because I had finally found someone I wanted beside me. The next 6 months were difficult. Owning Vale Meridian was nothing like acquiring it on paper. There were broken systems, bad contracts, employees who didn't trust me, managers who expected me to punish everyone. I didn't. I replaced the executives who had participated in fraud and deception. But I kept the workers. I invested in training. I combined Vale Meridian's physical distribution network with North Star's technology. The result was better than either company had been alone. And that was when the industry finally understood what had happened. I hadn't destroyed Vale Meridian. I made the old version of it unnecessary. The company that once believed it could succeed without me now depended on the business I had built after leaving. That was the irony. Their perfect plan hadn't been destroyed by revenge. It had been destroyed by reality. One Friday afternoon, Daniel came to my office. He placed a resignation letter on my desk. I stared at it. "Why? I'm leaving." "Where?" "I haven't decided." "Then why resign?" He smiled. "Because I think it's time." I leaned back. "You've done good work here." "I know. That's the first time I've heard you say something like that." He laughed. "I've changed." I noticed. He looked toward the window. "I used to think success meant making sure nobody could take anything from me. And now I think success means knowing what isn't worth holding." I looked at him. He turned back. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." "I already did." His eyes widened slightly. "When?" "I don't know." "Then why?" "Because I got tired of carrying you." He nodded. That answer hurt him, but he accepted it. Before leaving, he said, "I'm glad you didn't become like us." I smiled faintly. "Neither am I." He walked out. For a while, I thought that was the end. Then, 3 weeks later, Lena came into my office carrying a small box. "What's that?" "Open it." Inside was a simple silver key. I looked at her. "What is this?" "Our new house." I blinked. "You bought a house?" "We bought a house." I laughed. "You didn't even ask me." She shrugged. "I knew you'd overthink it." I pulled her into a hug. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something I had to earn. It felt like something I was allowed to enjoy. We moved into a quiet house outside the city. There was a small garden, a terrible-looking shed, and a kitchen where Lena immediately announced she was going to learn how to cook. She was terrible. We ordered takeout for the first 3 nights. I loved every one of them. North Star continued growing, but I stopped measuring my life entirely through numbers. We created scholarships for young engineers. We funded small business technology programs. We gave employees shares in the company. And once a year, I returned to the bakery where it all began. The old room upstairs was still there. Lena had turned it into a small community workspace. One evening, I stood by the window where I had once stared at a blank laptop screen and wondered whether I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Lena came beside me. "You remember? Every detail. What do you think now?" I looked at the city lights. I thought I was building a company because I had lost everything. She waited, but I was wrong. "What were you building?" I smiled. "A life." Then my phone rang. It was a message from Daniel. He had sent only one photograph. A picture of the old rooftop where he had proposed. Underneath, it were 6 words. "I'm glad you chose yourself, Mia." I stared at the message. For once, I didn't feel the need to answer. I simply deleted it. Not angrily, not sadly, peacefully. And that was when I understood that I had truly moved on. 2 years later, North Star's annual meeting was held in the same warehouse where everything had once gone wrong. The building looked completely different now. The walls had been repaired. The loading bays had new equipment. The offices were brighter. But I'd kept one thing unchanged. The old conference room. Not because I wanted to remember the betrayal, because I wanted to remember the woman who had finally walked out. That morning, I stood alone beside the glass wall. I could still picture Daniel sitting at the table, Richard beside him, Chloe across from me, the folder in my hands, the silence. The moment I realized nobody in that room was going to save me. Back then, I had thought that moment was the end of my life. It wasn't. It was the end of a version of it. The door opened. Lena walked in. "Everyone's waiting. I'll be there." She looked at me. "You okay?" I smiled. "Better than okay." She came closer. "Then why are you staring at that room?" "Because sometimes I need to remember that leaving was a decision, not a defeat." She kissed my cheek. "Come on, boss." I laughed. "I thought you were the boss at home. I'll let you pretend." We walked into the meeting together. North Star had become a major company. Vale Meridian was now one of its subsidiaries, but it operated independently under a new management team. The employees had stayed. The warehouses remained open. The business was profitable again. And the executives who had once built their plans around excluding me were no longer part of my daily life. Richard had retired. Chloe had started a small consulting company. Daniel had left the industry entirely. I occasionally heard updates about him. He was doing nonprofit work now, helping small businesses improve their operations. When I heard that, I felt something close to happiness for him. Not because I wanted him back, because I genuinely hoped he had become someone he could respect. That afternoon, after the meeting, I received an invitation to speak at a university. The subject was entrepreneurship. I almost declined. Then I accepted. Standing on that stage a month later, I looked at hundreds of students. One young woman asked, "What was the hardest part of becoming successful?" I thought for a moment, believing I was allowed to succeed without anyone's permission. She nodded. Another student asked, "Did you ever want revenge?" I smiled. Yes. The room became quiet. Then I realized revenge still meant they were controlling my life. I paused. So I stopped. Someone asked, "What happened after that?" I looked at the audience. I built. That was all. But after the lecture, the young woman who had asked the first question came to me. She said, "I think I'm afraid to leave my job." "Why?" "Because everyone there thinks I'm replaceable." I smiled. "Maybe they are right." She looked shocked. Then I continued, "Maybe you are replaceable there." I pointed toward the doors. That doesn't mean you're replaceable everywhere. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. As she walked away, I realized something. My greatest achievement wasn't North Star's valuation. It wasn't the acquisition. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even proving Richard wrong. It was becoming the kind of person who could tell someone else what I had once needed to hear. You are allowed to leave a place that doesn't value you. You are allowed to build somewhere else. And you don't have to destroy the people who hurt you to prove that you survived. That evening, Lena and I returned home. She handed me a cup of tea. How was the speech? Good. What did you talk about? I smiled. Leaving, she sat beside me. Funny. What? You've spent years building things. I looked at her. And the biggest thing you built was the life you thought you'd lost. I held her hand. No. I corrected her gently. It was the life I had never given myself permission to build. Years later, I still occasionally thought about Daniel. Not with longing. Not with anger. Just memory. Some people remain important even after they stop being part of your life. Daniel had been my first great love. He had also been the person who taught me that love, without respect, could become a cage. I didn't hate him for that lesson, but I didn't need to repeat it. One winter morning, I received a handwritten letter. There was no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Daniel. I opened it. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask to meet. He simply wrote that he had spent years thinking about the conference room. He said he finally understood what had happened. I thought losing you was the consequence of one bad decision, he had written. It wasn't. It was the consequence of hundreds of small decisions where I chose convenience over courage. I stopped reading for a moment, then continued. He wrote that he was proud of what North Star had become, and he said something that stayed with me. I used to think you left because you stopped loving me. Now I understand that you left because you finally started loving yourself. I folded the letter. I didn't need to answer. Some endings don't require another conversation. That evening, I put the letter into a drawer. Not as a keepsake, as a reminder. Lena found me there. Another message from the past? Yes. Do you want to talk about it? I shook my head. No. She nodded. Then she took my hand. Good. We went outside. Our garden was covered in thin snow. The house was quiet. There were photographs on the walls. Our wedding. Our employees. The bakery. The first North Star office. And one photograph of me standing in front of the old conference room. I looked at it for a moment. Then I realized something strange. I couldn't remember the exact sound of Richard's voice anymore. I couldn't remember what Chloe had been wearing that day. I couldn't remember Daniel's expression clearly. The details were fading. But I remember the most important thing. The moment I walked out. The moment I stopped begging to be chosen. The moment I chose myself. That was the real beginning. People sometimes asked me whether I considered what happened a tragedy. I always answered the same way. It was painful. Then I would smile. But pain and tragedy aren't always the same thing. Pain can become a doorway. A betrayal can become a boundary. An ending can become an invitation. And losing the people you thought you needed can sometimes reveal how much you are capable of building alone. I didn't destroy their perfect plan. Their perfect plan destroyed itself because it had been built on the assumption that I would always stay small. They believed I would return. They believed I would apologize. They believed I couldn't succeed without them. They were wrong. But proving them wrong was never the final victory. The final victory was waking up one morning and realizing I no longer cared whether they knew. My company continued growing. My marriage with Lena became quieter and stronger with every year. We built a home. We helped young founders. We supported small businesses. We traveled when we could. And sometimes, on rainy evenings, I would sit beside the window with a cup of tea and think about that woman who once stood outside a conference room holding a folder. I wished I could go back and tell her something. Not that everything would become successful. Not that she would become wealthy. Not that the people who hurt her would regret it. I would simply tell her, you don't need to convince them. Walk away. Build. One day, you'll understand. And now I do. I understand that leaving wasn't giving up. It was the first decision I ever made entirely for myself. And the life waiting on the other side of that decision was better than anything I had once begged someone else to give me. Because in the end, I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their regret. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. I had something better. a life they could no longer define. And for the first time, I was exactly where I belonged, with the people who chose me freely, in the company I built with my own hands, and inside a future that belonged completely to me.